Censorship, deplatforming, defamation and more. The state of comedy in the 21st century. Especially against the background of the essential importance of humor and comedy for the human psyche and the cohesion of a society, which I described in the first part, it is downright frightening when you look at the current comedy landscape of the supposed free Western countries. Here is a rough overview of the desolate situation in Germany, England and America. Let's start with the desert-like landscape of German comedy programs, free of all humor. Here, unfunny third-wave feminists like Caroline Kebekus prove anew at every appearance how humor-free and out of touch with reality they are. Because an essential element of humor is the exaggeration of real problems. But if you base your program on long-refuted feminist talking points and narratives, like the patriarchy or the gender pay gap, any sane person will turn away shaking their head. Which means, conversely, that the goal of such talent-free morons like Kebekus and her ilk does not serve, as it should be, the catharsis of the listener. At best, they make their program for a target group that is already just as ideologized as they are and that thus gets the perceived confirmation for their lunatic thesis. At worst, especially when they are broadcast nationwide with compulsory fees, they serve as a propaganda tool to fill even the last illusion-free corner of the brain of the TV viewer through constant repetition of false premises. Of course, this also applies to whiner Jan Böhmermann, whose popularity can also only be explained by the already advanced media mass dumbing down, because his broadcasts have a level that would leave a 3-year-old underwhelmed, because it would represent an intellectual step backwards for him. Real satirists and cabaret artists like Dieter Hildebrand are rotating in their graves over the embarrassing left-wing radical activism that Böhmermann blows into the ether. The same goes for the Heute Show, probably by far the most pathetic example of the lack of ideas and humor in German fee-financed comedy attempts. Not only is the entire concept stolen one-to-one from the US Daily Show, which reached its highest popularity under host Jon Stewart from 1999 to 2015, but as a long-time TV consumer, one is already used to the fact that the by far most expensive public broadcasting service in the world brazenly steals or buys ideas, formats and concepts from other countries instead of putting the money into its own creative ideas. But on the Heute Show, they were even more brazen than usual. While the original, The Daily Show, as the name already suggests, is broadcast daily from Monday to Thursday with a new episode, this is probably too expensive or too complicated for the German broadcaster, and they broadcast it weekly. Even if heute really means daily. Well, if one has to endure brain-dead fatzos like Oliver Welke instead of a charismatic host like Jon Stewart, who present the worst gags of the new millennium while omitting any charm or wit, then maybe it's better that way. Even the comedians' characters are stolen. For example, the character of Gernot Hassknecht is nothing more than a cheap imitation of the popular US comedian Louis Black, who has his own regular segment on The Daily Show called Back in Black. To what extent Mr. Black knows that he has a helpless German language clone, and how that looks legally, should he not know it, to simply copy the characteristics of a comedian down to the last detail, I leave open for discussion. But well, Germany used to be known for its innovations and inventiveness, but in the 21st century it is mainly known for plagiarism and incompetence, so it fits perfectly into the picture. But if these cornerstones of public broadcasting's comedy are supposed to be the best examples of 21st century German humor, then it's time to either give up your German citizenship or jump out of the window, maybe even both. Especially when, at the same time, merited comedy legends like Dieter Hallervorden or Otto Walkes have to take criticism for their politically incorrect gags of yesteryear. And even Bully Herbig's glorious Winnetou parody, Shoot Is Money Too, is now coming under the scrutiny of self-appointed guardians of public morals. The public broadcasters have just censored reruns of Hallervorden's old sketch shows because he, of course, said the perfectly harmless and in no way offensive or racist word Negro. That, by the way, was the first red line of political correctness imposed on us that we should never have crossed. We should never have allowed a harmless term like Negro to be transformed into something supposedly unspeakable racist within a very short time and without any basis. By doing so, we showed the mob that their tactics work. And this tactic is as perfidious as it is effective. First, the term is framed as something racist, and then every professor of German studies who cares about his reputation will think twice before defending the term in public, because who wants to be associated with racism, even if he is factually in the right? We are currently experiencing the same thing with the word Zigeuner, gypsy. And the mania today to remove all these terms from old comedy shows, movies, even books, has absolutely nothing to do with the excuse of a modern, progressive, more sensitive society, but is the exact opposite of it. It is authoritarian, totalitarian, and historical revisionist. We've just become more adept at it. We don't burn books and works of art anymore. We just delete passages or rewrite them, censor comedy sketches, which is effectively much worse than burning books. Because it doesn't destroy the works completely, but it falsifies them. And future generations are thus deprived of the originals as well, but instead get an artificial, blunt copy adapted to the totalitarian newspeak. Disgusting. Of course, there are still comedians in Germany who don't adhere to political correctness, such as Nikolai Binner, but even they have to be more and more careful about what and how they say something if they don't want to be cancelled by the hysterical Twitter mob. In the USA, it looks even worse. The world-famous Jerry Seinfeld is one of many comedians who no longer perform at universities because they face too much hate and agitation from the oh-so-tolerant, left-ideologized student snowflakes there. And Seinfeld isn't exactly known for his edgy, boundary-pushing humor, but he is pretty much the most inoffensive kind of comedy there is. When left libertarian HBO star Bill Maher appears at universities, there are also regular protests against him from the left. Comedy legends like George Carlin, who gave his blows to everything and everyone, regardless of opinion, gender, skin color, and such, as it should be in a free country, can be glad that they are already dead. Today, they would cause one shitstorm after another, with their politically incorrect humor. The entire late-night scene on US television has also taken a turn for the worse since 2016, as the declining ratings clearly show. The concept of late-night shows has been as simple as it is ingenious since the 50s, practically since the beginning of television. The viewer is presented with the most important events of the day in a humorous opening monologue by the host, followed by 2 sketches, a celebrity guest or 2, and a musical artist to round things off, with the opening monologue always being the comedy centerpiece, the recipe for success of which always was to take the mickey out of both sides, especially when it came to politically charged topics, since the aim was ultimately to appeal to everyone and reach as broad and diverse a viewership as possible. Since 2016, however, the comedians scared off more than half of their audience by becoming absolutely one-sided and unfunny. Listening to Orange Man Bad in every possible variation, night after night for years, just isn't helpful for ratings. Becoming one-sided is already bad enough, but to combine this with the biggest yawns from the museum of limp gags and empty phrases, and to present this to the viewer as funny entertainment is quite brazen. But when you are so consumed by hatred for a sitting president, the creative juices just won't flow properly, and you are left with dull slogans and narratives that are as devoid of humor as they are of reality. This is another similarity between the US late-night shows and the Heute Show, because what Trump is for the American left-leaning comedy writers, the AfD is for the German ones. The fundamental difference of what the media and critics want to what the audience wants became clear in 2019 with Dave Chappelle's latest stand-up special. Critically panned, hated on Twitter, the Black Comedian's special, which in the best Eddie Murphy Chris Rock tradition didn't mince words and just gave the woken, political correct mob a verbal thrashing that was a real doozy, was loved by audiences. Likewise, Ricky Gervais' great 2020 Golden Globe speech, with which he mercilessly held a mirror up to the self-absorbed Hollywood elite, which has always been a comedian's job. At a time when even Disney is censoring its own films, it is much needed. The studio removed a casting couch gag from the animated film Toy Story 2, because it was no longer appropriate in the age of Me Too. This disgusting presumption of wanting to determine what is good for the audience and what is not is another bad habit that has spread in recent years. I am a free, adult individual and can decide for myself what I listen to and how I assess it. It's bad enough that Hollywood focuses on political correctness combined with hatred of men and white people in its current films, which combined with this inherent sexism and racism and incompetent writers is almost always done at the expense of the story and characters, making current motion pictures increasingly unbearable. But leave the classics alone, because here too, what has already been said about the burning of books and the tainting of history applies. I would like to be able to show my children my favorite media as I have seen them, and not cut and edited to satisfy a totalitarian mob. Last but not least, we look to the British. It's not enough that classics like Benny Hill are hardly ever shown on TV anymore because of accusations of sexism, and even the guys from Monty Python have had to deal with the Twitter mob. Most recently John Cleese, when he made the truthful statement that London is no longer English because too many non-cultural immigrants populate the metropolis. With paragraph 5 of their public order law, the British have had a law since 1986, under which it is punishable to insult others. However, since in recent years there have been more and more self-absorbed snowflakes running around in Great Britain who immediately feel offended by anything and everything they don't like, and since the law is so vaguely worded that there is no fixed definition of what constitutes an insult, there have been increasingly absurd insult lawsuits in recent years, to the extent that even comedian Rowan Atkinson, better known in Germany as Mr. Bean, had to become active for the good of the comedy industry and held a flaming appeal that paragraph 5 must be reformed at least. Because one of the central elements of comedy is the exaggeration, and thus also the insult and discrimination of minorities and individuals can be included, even must be included. Because comedy is also an outlet for the listeners. Because in this point, too, the self-appointed experts who want to castrate the comedians are wrong or lying. Stereotypes and the ridiculing of the same do not promote violence against minorities, but prevent it. If you take away any outlet for people who, for whatever reason, don't respond well to one sort of person or another, you promote the very condition you supposedly don't want to have. Because the idea that if you stop using supposedly racist terms, stop propagating stereotypes and don't insult or discriminate against anyone, racism and prejudice will disappear is as naive as it is counterproductive. There will always be racism, stereotypes and prejudice as long as there are human beings. Trying to change human nature has never worked and will never work, but as always will only lead to more suffering and less freedom. That is why true freethinkers like Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Peter Hitchens, Stephen Fry, Rowan Atkinson and many others call for the deletion, without replacement, of paragraphs like paragraph 5, or here in Germany the blasphemy paragraph 166, as well as all other insult laws. They rightly talk about the fact that in a free country, a country where real freedom of opinion and freedom of speech exists, we must have the right to offend, a right to insult others and to hurt others verbally. Because, and this is the key point, an insult is never given on the part of the sender, but is always as such interpreted by the receiver. What offends one leaves the other cold. Being offended is a feeling. I feel offended. And we can't make laws based on feelings. I don't know what's so hard to understand about that. Instead of making nonsensical laws that restrict freedom of speech, we should invest more time and money into making people have thicker skin and not get offended or outraged by every piece of shit and learn to deal with unpleasant statements like adults and let them roll off their backs. Sticks and stones may hurt my bones, but words will never hurt me. But we prefer to promote the culture of indignation. I myself keep to the motto, I'd rather lose a good friend than lose a silly remark. First of all, I don't have to worry about what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to say. And if my counterpart ends the friendship because of a bad joke, then it wasn't a friendship and I haven't lost anything of value. In this sense, thank you for your attention. See you in hell.